Julius Caesar, by history for hotties. Ever heard the name Julius Caesar and pictured a king born with a golden crown on his head? Well, think again. The story of Caesar isn't about inheriting power. It's about seizing it with brilliant strategy, sharp words, and a whole lot of ambition. Get ready, because we're about to dive into the life of the man who broke the Roman Republic. Gaius Julius Caesar was born in 100 BC into a noble Roman family, but noble didn't mean rich. His family, the Iuli, claimed descent from the goddess Venus, which was great for bragging rights, but not so great for paying the bills. The Rome of his childhood was a chaotic, sprawling city, a mix of incredible wealth and desperate poverty, powered by corruption and political backstabbing. It was the perfect playground for a boy like Caesar, intensely smart, observant, and with a hunger for politics. From a young age, he watched the powerful senators, learning the game of power like it was his favorite sport. Just as he was entering manhood, at age 16, his world was turned upside down when his father suddenly died. This thrust him into the role of head of the family. 2 years later, he made a strategic move, marrying Cornelia, the daughter of a powerful political figure. But this was Rome, and fortunes could change in an instant. A brutal dictator named Sulla seized power and started purging his enemies. Sulla demanded that Caesar divorce Cornelia to prove his loyalty. Caesar, in a stunning act of defiance for a young man with no real power, refused. It was a brave, almost reckless decision. The price? He was stripped of his inheritance, his wife's dowry, and his position. He lost everything and had to go on the run, fleeing Rome just to stay alive. But you can't keep a man like Caesar down for long. After Sulla's death, he returned to Rome, not with his tail between his legs, but with a fire in his belly. He had to start from the bottom, climbing the political ladder one slow, deliberate step at a time. He took on minor priesthoods and worked as a lawyer in the Roman Forum. And it was here that people began to notice his greatest weapon, his voice. Caesar was a master orator. His speeches were powerful, persuasive, and captivating. He could spin a narrative, win over a crowd, and dismantle an opponent's argument with surgical precision. People didn't just hear him, they listened. They believed he was building his brand, one speech at a time. As his reputation grew, Caesar knew he couldn't conquer Rome alone. So, in 60 BC, he did something unprecedented. He forged a secret alliance with the two most powerful men in the city. First, there was Pompey the Great, Rome's most celebrated and successful general, a military hero with an army that adored him. Then there was Marcus Licinius Crassus, who was, to put it mildly, ridiculously rich. He was the money man, the one who could fund their ambitions. This unofficial pact became known as the First Triumvirate. It wasn't a formal government body. It was a handshake deal between three titans, each with a common goal: to bypass the gridlock Senate and carve up the power of Rome for themselves. This was power politics at its most raw. The triumvirate delivered. Caesar got what he wanted, a 5-year term as governor of a region that included parts of modern-day France, which the Romans called Gaul. Officially, his job was to maintain peace and protect Rome's borders. But Caesar had bigger plans. For him, Gaul wasn't a post, it was a prize. He didn't just keep order. He launched a full-scale 8-year campaign of conquest. He led his legions across treacherous rivers, over the snowy Alps, and even made a brief, shocking landing in Britain. He was a brilliant, hands-on general who shared the hardships of his soldiers, earning their undying loyalty. And he was also a master propagandist. He wrote down everything in a book, commentaries on the Gallic Wars. It was part military report, part political advertisement, part adventure story, written in crisp, clear Latin. It made him a superstar back in Rome, like an ancient influencer, lived tweeting his conquests with a sword. While Caesar was winning glory in Gaul, The political glue holding the triumvirate together began to dissolve back in Rome. First, Crassus, seeking his own military fame, was killed in a disastrous campaign in the east. His death removed the balancing force, the financial buffer, between the two remaining giants, Caesar and Pompey. With Crassus gone, Pompey, who had stayed in Rome, grew increasingly wary of Caesar's soaring popularity and his fiercely loyal army. Egged on by senators who feared Caesar's ambition, Pompey sided with the establishment. The Senate issued an ultimatum. Caesar must disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen to stand trial for his actions. It was a trap, and Caesar knew it. Obeying meant political ruin and likely exile. This brings us to one of history's most iconic moments. On January 10th, 49 BC, Caesar stood with his 13th legion at the bank of a small river called the Rubicon. This river marked the legal boundary of his province. To cross it with his army was an act of treason, a declaration of war against the Roman state. He paused, knowing the gravity of the decision. According to the historian Suetonius, he said, "Alia iacta est," the die is cast. He then led his men across the water. This is the origin of our phrase crossing the Rubicon, which means passing a point of no return. There was no going back now. He was marching on Rome itself. The Senate panicked. Pompey, despite his military reputation, was caught unprepared and fled the city, taking many senators with him. The civil war had begun. Caesar didn't just stop at Rome. He chased Pompey across the Mediterranean. The final showdown wasn't in Italy or Greece, but all the way in Egypt. Pompey sought refuge there, but the young Egyptian pharaoh, Ptolemy XIII, made a fatal miscalculation. Trying to curry favor with the approaching Caesar, he had Pompey assassinated. When Caesar arrived and was presented with Pompey's head, he was reportedly furious. It was a dishonorable end for a great Roman, but his arrival in Egypt led to another legendary chapter in his life. He found himself embroiled in a civil war between the young pharaoh and his brilliant, ambitious older sister, Cleopatra. She saw Caesar as her ticket to power. In a famous tale, she had herself smuggled into his quarters, rolled up in a carpet, to plead her case. Caesar, a man who appreciated boldness and strategy, was captivated. It was an alliance born of mutual need. She needed his military might, and he needed Egypt's vast wealth to fund his war. It was a partnership of sparks, strategy, and yes, romance. They became lovers, and she gave birth to his only known son, Caesarion. With Egypt secured and Cleopatra on the throne, Caesar returned to Rome, victorious and unchallenged. He was the undisputed master of the Roman world. He was showered with honors and titles, culminating in the most un-Roman of them all, dictator perpetuo, or dictator for life. For many senators, this was the final straw. The entire Roman Republic had been founded on the principle of rejecting kings. The title of king was poison, and now Caesar was acting like one. He wore special robes, sat on a golden chair, and his face was being put on coins while he was still alive, an honor previously reserved for gods. A conspiracy began to form, not among his enemies, but among his own peers, senators who considered themselves patriots, defenders of the Republic. Many were men he had pardoned, men he considered friends. The day chosen for the assassination was the 15th of March, 44. BCA date known on the Roman calendar as the Ides of March. A seer had supposedly warned Caesar to beware the Ides of March, but he dismissed the warning. As he entered the Senate building, the conspirators surrounded him, pretending to present a petition. Then they drew their daggers. He was stabbed 23 times. The most famous and heartbreaking part of this story involves a man named Marcus Junius Brutus. Brutus's mother had been Caesar's mistress, and Caesar had treated Brutus almost like a son, promoting his career and pardoning him after the Civil War. The legendary last words, "Et tu, Brute," you too, Brutus, were actually invented by Shakespeare. But the sentiment, the shock of betrayal by someone he trusted so deeply, was very real. The conspirators thought that by killing Caesar, they would save the Republic. They were catastrophically wrong. Instead of restoring freedom, his death created a power vacuum that plunged Rome into another 13 years of brutal civil war. The Republic didn't revive, it died with him. In the chaos that followed, a new figure emerged, Caesar's grandnephew and adopted heir, a young, cunning man named Octavian. After defeating all his rivals, including Caesar's assassins and his former ally Mark Antony, Octavian would transform what was left of the Republic into the Roman Empire. He would change his name to Augustus and become the very first Roman emperor. And what of Caesar? The man who was murdered for acting like a king was officially deified by the Senate. He became a god. Julius Caesar never got to be emperor, but he paved the way. He was a man, a myth, and the turning point that didn't just change Rome, he broke it. And from the pieces, an empire was born. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the incredible life of Julius Caesar. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, please hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next video. See you next time.